is Kababayan LA Year-Ender Edition, and actually Year-Ender Show, and this is the Immigration Edition. As we talked about earlier, 2012 was a big year for immigration. Of course, you've been seeing them all throughout the year. Attorney Richard Lowe still with us, and Attorney Allison Aquino now joining us for this part of the show and all throughout the show. Allison, we were talking about the positive developments in immigration. For you, we talked about DACA, we talked about secure communities. There are more.
2012 was a very positive year for immigrants, for the immigrant community. And one of the biggest developments was really a Ninth Circuit Court case that dealt with kids who had aged out of their parents' petition. And this new case is so significant because it really can have the potential of decreasing the waiting time from 10, 15 years to immediately. And so under this case, it essentially allowed the transfer or the retention of the priority date on a prior petition to be sent over to the next petition filed and hopefully be able to cut down that waiting list. Like
because I was a victim of that. I aged out, right? And I think I waited about more than 20 years.
The waiting period that you particularly went under was a very long period of time.
Right.
And unfortunately, people from the Philippines do undergo similar waiting periods.
Right. Okay. So that's another positive thing. What else?
One of the main things was the change or the announcement made by the president earlier this year regarding the ability to process waivers for unlawful presence.
Okay, this
here
is
in
a
the
cancellation of removal, or is that the same?
No, it's not cancellation of removal. What it is that it is the fraud waivers that used to be processed at the consulate can now be processed in country, not just fraud waivers, but also overstay waivers. So people who have come and stayed, let's say, entered on a B2 visa, but then stayed longer than they're supposed to, if they have trouble adjusting for one, let's say through an employment base, they can now go to the consulate and then also do an in-country before they go, do the waiver for the unlawful presence here so that they have an answer before they go to the consulate.
How is this significant? Are Filipinos affected by this?
It is. There's a lot of Filipinos who may not have had evidence of their entry into the United States, or maybe they entered with a certain type of visa that does not allow them to adjust status here in the U.S., such as a Siemens visa, C1 visa, and an in-transit visa. So a lot of people who are ineligible to adjust status, their only ability to legalize status is by going back to the Philippines and processing there. But the problem that we've had is that as soon as people leave the U.S. and go back to the Philippines, they're subject to a bar, a 3-year or a 10-year bar. And so this new procedure now allows individuals to first process that waiver here in the U.S. And so they don't have to take the risk of leaving the country, going back to the Philippines, and not knowing if they're going to be stuck there for 10 years or possibly indefinitely.
And so tell us, when these things are processed, what are the chances of those being approved? I mean, the statistics that your law office have worked on.
Well, I would say that actually this year, again, is a good year because through the Administrative Appeals Office, there has been an increase in the number of people who have been granted. And so just like the shift in 2012 has been a positive shift for immigration, that has translated into processing of waivers, how people are being treated with prosecutorial discretion. And so just the whole mood and the whole vibe in 2012 is definitely pro-immigrant.
Pro-immigrant. Okay, anything else? So we talked about DACA, secure communities. We've talked about the age-out eligibility.
I believe one of the main other significant factors this year is the attitude toward the LGBT community.
Okay.
And with prosecutorial discretion and the rights that are being afforded to same-sex couples and the recognition that individuals in same-sex couples and relationships should be treated as humanely, as fairly as we do other heterosexual couples.
Meaning, you know, are there some states now allowing people to petition for their spouse?
Not that the states are allowed, because that's still a federal law, but that the federal government is actually backing down from making definitive decisions yet on those cases, so that they are kind of they're in a nebulous state. They're not being granted, but they're not being denied either. And I think that's a move going forward, waiting until the Supreme Court rules on the DOMA and all of those things that are going to come down next year.
Because at least now they're considering the community and their feelings, their rights, and all that.
Exactly.
Anything else?
I think one last positive that we were talking about recently is the change to the attitude of advanced parole.
Okay.
And if you want to...
Yeah, you know, advanced parole was before, when you were in a process, an application process, and maybe you'd been here for a long time, and you wanted to go home because you've been here 15 years, and you could apply for advanced parole, but if you left and returned, you were subject to a bar, a 10-year bar.
Okay.
So many people still weren't able to go home, even though they were in this process. But recently there was a case that said if you are in a process for adjustment of status, that advanced parole returns you back to that process, and so you're not subject to any of those bars. So people who have been here a long time, who want to travel, and I see this a lot for people whose families are sick, and they just feel like they're forced to travel, even if they, whatever the consequences. This is something that's beneficial to them. They actually can just return back to that status and proceed forward with their adjustment as if they hadn't left.
Also for Filipinos, I hear stories of people not being able to go home even to the Philippines for special milestones in their families because, and even, you know, sick people or some people who've passed, they can't even go say their last goodbyes because, you know, they're worried about being in status or being out of status or being barred. So this is definitely positive.
Exactly. And actually there was a time period in 2006 where a lot of people were able to file adjustment of status applications, and because of the retrogression, their adjustment of status applications are now pending 6 years later. And so that's why this was actually really significant, because there are big events that you want to be able to go home to.
Exactly. So a lot of positive developments in terms of immigration. Were there not so good ones? Were there negative ones? We're going to be talking about that when we return on the show. Don't go away.